people still ordering a beer. Okay, we can begin. Good. Okay, so welcome everyone to the first Science Cafe of 2019. We are very happy to have here Dr. Katja Valli from the Department of Psychology of the University of Turku. And this is a really exciting and very interesting topic. The title is Dreaming as Virtual Reality, so we will hear more about dreaming, I guess, and virtual reality too, maybe. Okay, Katja. Please, the floor is yours.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for showing up this early afternoon. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is how dreams can be conceptualized as a form of virtual reality, and then what types of other simulations, virtual reality simulations, we have in addition to dreams, what their possible neural mechanisms might be, and is there any use to have simulations, either when you are asleep or when you are awake or during sedation and so on. But I will start with a short video, about 3-minute video clip from one of my all-time favorite movies. It was launched in 1984. I was about 10 years old, and I saw it a few years later because it was rated not suitable for kids. And in this video, a girl is undergoing a sleep study. Her mother has taken her to a sleep clinic because she's having terrible nightmares. There has been a couple of murders, and ever since she has suffered from nightmares, and she believes that her dreams are real, that what happens to her in the dreams actually happens to her in reality. So, and we should even have sound for the video. Some of you may recognize this. So they are hooking her up to EEG equipment to monitor her brain waves while she's sleeping.
What's she doing now? Is she asleep or what? Something's wrong with me. It's this way. What's she doing? Is she dreaming?
Yes, she has a cut on her hand. And she also brought something back from her dream. It's a hat.
Where did you get that? I grabbed it on the day.
How many of you recognize the movie? A few? So why I picked this movie clip is, well, first of all, it exploited the age-old myth that if you die in your dreams, you die for real. And even though it was published in 1984, it had many quirks that are still relevant to dream science today. So the movie was Nightmare on Elm Street. And there are some empirical questions that dream science is actually still trying to resolve that were brought up in the movie. Like what dreams really are, an age-old question. What is the difference between dream and wake experiences? Because in this movie, dream experiences were so real that she could actually bring something back from her dream. Most interestingly, the sleep scientist could tell from her EEG trace when she was dreaming, and also he said that, and it's a good one, so what kind of a dream she was having. And this is something that scientists are still not able to do, so we cannot brain read and tell when a person is dreaming or what they are dreaming about. But there has been some interesting developments in this field in the past couple of years. And I also want to talk about the function of dreaming, because the girl asked, why couldn't you just give me a pill to stop me from dreaming? And the doctor says that you'll go cuckoo if you don't dream. And that's actually not the case. But the other question is, do dreams really have any function, or could we just as well do without them? And also there's one personal reason why this movie is important, but you know, there has to be a punchline to the talk, so you'll have to wait until the end of the talk. So I'll talk about dreams as virtual reality simulation, and then what kind of simulations we have, also in other states of consciousness than during sleep, what might be the underlying neural network for simulating things, and then about the simulation theories of dreaming, and are these dream simulations really good for anything? So what's virtual reality? Oxford Dictionary defines it as a computer-generated scenario that simulates experience. But if we extend this to dreaming, we can basically say that what dreams are, they are brain-generated simulations that take place during sleep. And they simulate the waking perceptual world and our waking experiences in a very realistic manner. And I'm not the first one to conceptualize dreams as simulations. Already Frederick Snyder in the 70s, before I was born, wrote that dreams are a remarkably faithful replica of real life. And others after that, David Folks, that dreams are a credible world analog, a perfect simulation or nearly perfect simulation of what real life is like. Charles Tart talked about an active, complex world simulation. Harry Hunt, relatively true to life reconstruction. Antti Revonsuo, whom I've been working with for about 20 years, a realistic simulation of the perceptual world, and so on and so on. But why this is interesting and important is that scientists have actually debated for tens of years what dreams really are and how we can define what dreams are. And this idea of defining dreams as simulations of the perceptual world is something that dream scientists all around the world are starting to agree on. So that there now seems to be this convergence in defining dreams as simulations. And it's important in science, if you want to study something, that you agree what you are studying. So this is kind of promising to have this kind of a unified conception of what dreams are. Then the question is, if we look at what kinds of, how our dreams are like, are they really credible simulations of the waking perceptual world? And to answer that question, we need to look at the content of dreams and the form of dreams. If we look at sensory modalities, all the sensory modalities are present in dreams, and in fact, to the same degree as they are present in our waking lives. So humans who are very visually and auditorily oriented, these two modalities also dominate in our dreams, but we do have smell and taste and even pain experiences, although they are much more rare. And in the early 90s, Alan Retzoffen and Cheryl Bugnani did a study to look at, are the visual qualities of dreams similar to the way we perceive the world while we are awake? So they had people sleeping in the lab, they woke those people up from REM sleep, and then they showed them 100 different photographs. And the photographs had been photoshopped. So some portrayed the environment as we typically see it. In some photographs, they had changed the photographs to black and white, they changed the illumination, the focus, they blurred the edges, and so on. And then they asked people to pick the photograph that most closely resembled the visual quality of the dream. And you can probably guess that people most often chose the photograph that had not been altered in any way. So visually, our dreams look to us similar than you look to me right now. All kinds of elements that are typical for our waking life, other people, animals, different types of places, actions, interactions are present in our dreams. Some people have said that, well, what makes dreams different from reality or waking perception is that dreams have bizarre qualities. You know, you can fly in your dreams, and you know, objects can be completely funny and actions impossible. But in fact, if we look at dreams and how much bizarreness there is in our dreams, less than 10% of dreams have these physically impossible elements like flying. And if we compare tables in dreams, in 90% of cases, the tables in dreams resemble real tables and not tables that can walk around. So in fact, most elements in dreams quite perfectly match their waking counterparts. So they are realistic models of their real counterparts. And so we usually think that dreams are bizarre because bizarre things are easy to remember. They strike out. But if we look at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dream reports and the elements in those dreams, there's actually very little bizarreness. So dreams are not as bizarre as we tend to think, and flying pigs don't show up that often in dreams. But what about simulating the self in the dream? So are our dream selves, our dream avatars realistic? Well, first of all, the dream self is present in pretty much every dream. There is always somebody who's either observing or interacting with other characters in the dream. And usually the dream self is highly similar to waking self and embodied in a sense that the dream self is in a dream body looking at the world through the eyes of the dream self. There are some dreams where the dream self can be bizarre or distorted. So has any one of you been an animal in your dreams? That's quite rare, but it happens. You can even be an object, although that's incredibly rare. And sometimes you can have dreams where you are kind of like this a camera view floating over dream events which unfold. So you are looking at the dream as if though you are looking at the movie. But there is still the self observing things going on, even if there isn't an embodied dream self. But in about 95% of dreams, there is a dream self in a dream body, and it's typically highly similar to the waking self. So our dream avatars are kind of realistic simulations of ourselves. The dream self is active, it interacts with other characters. And we usually think that dreams just unfold and the dream self really doesn't have any kind of influence on what happens in the dream. But if we look at dream content, people think in their dreams, they contemplate on what they should do next, what will be the consequences of their actions. So there is this kind of reasoning and free will in dreams. And in fact, if we look at how the dream cells think within the dream scenario, they usually think in a very reasonable way. So if something happens, you tend to reason appropriately about it and have appropriate reactions. But this is called context logic, and this is well preserved in dreams. But what the dream self doesn't realize at all is that this is a dream, this is a hallucination, this is not really happening. So the state logic, understanding that you are actually in a state of sleep and dreaming, that doesn't really work. Only in lucid dreams, which are, well, for most people, rare occasions. So that you realize while you are having the dream that this is a dream. And I can even maybe guide the dream, and I can make people appear at will, and I can go and fly and walk through the walls and like that. But these lucid dreams are a special case. So if we are to experience these dream simulations as real, this deficient state logic is actually necessary. Because if we would always realize that we are dreaming while we are dreaming, we would just, you know, how would I say, enjoy it as a movie. But if dreams are functional, and if something happens in the dreams that we have to take for granted that this is really happening and I have to react to this appropriately, then it's a very good thing not to understand that this is a simulation, this is a hallucination. So I'll come back to this point later on. So maybe the take-home message from this part of the talk would be that dreams are these relatively credible world simulations, relatively realistic. There is this dream self, which experiences the dream from the first-person perspective, and dreams are experienced as real as waking experiences. In fact, somebody said that we shouldn't be talking about real experiences because all experiences are real, independent on which state of consciousness you have them. But it's sometimes easier to say real than say waking experience. Am I talking too fast? Okay, so you can follow? Okay. And if you have any questions in the middle, I think feel free to interrupt. I mean, I don't have to at the end. Yeah, because easily a good question is forgotten by the end of the talk. Then if we look at, okay, so we have these simulations asleep, we have dreams. What about other states of consciousness? Is our waking consciousness actually also a simulation? Because we tend to think that we have this very intimate relationship with the physical world around us. But what might be happening actually in our brain is that our brain creates a model of the surrounding world. And this model is only in our heads. It's not anywhere else. And the brain is actually building a model, a simulation of the physical world. And Charles Tart talked about that in both dreaming and waking, there is an active, complex world simulation going on, basically identical in kind. So he compared wake and dream simulations. Antti Revonsua has had the same idea that both dreams and our everyday waking phenomenal world, they can be defined as constructed virtual realities because our brain creates a model of the world. Rodolfo Linus talked about life is a dream guided by the senses because, of course, when we are awake, the contents of our consciousness is modulated by the information that we get from our senses. I see you, I interact with you, I talk with you. While I'm dreaming, sensory input is cut off. And my brain is only internally activated and builds a model of this internal activation without this sensory input. But while we are awake, sensory input has a big role in modulating what kind of a simulation or model our brains build. And we even tend to think that we all see the world in a similar way. But in fact, people see colors differently, they pay attention to different things, so their simulations during wakefulness are different. So the simulation that we have of the physical environment, it's not perfect. It's good enough so that we can appropriately react and navigate in our environment, but all of us have slightly different simulations. Our senses are limited. Well, there's selective attention, so people pay attention to different things. And if we compare, for example, human perception, so this is the way humans would see this particular flower. other animals simulate the world differently because they have different senses, and this is a simulation of what is the most likely way a bee sees this flower, because it has the possibility to see ultraviolet, which human eye cannot detect. So the simulations for all of us are slightly different, but as long as they are guided by the physical cues in the environment, they are similar enough so that we understand that we are occupying the same space and attending the same talk and so on. So it seems that if we also conceive the waking reality as a simulation, that what our brain actually is, it's a simulation generator. It's a machine that builds a simulation of the world. And then waking consciousness and dream consciousness are just manifestations of the function of this simulation mechanism. The simulations that we have during sleep are not guided by the senses, while they are during wakefulness. So the simulations are different because they are guided differently, and the physiological activation of the brain is different in wake and asleep. But it's all about the same natural biological machinery that builds a model. And it does this during wakefulness, but it keeps doing it also during sleep. So during wakefulness, when we see a frog, so there's sensory input about frog, we tend to have the experience of a frog. When we are asleep, there is no sensory input, and when we have a dream, this is basically the internal activation of our own brain that the brain then interprets as images. A memory of a frog may trigger a dream about a frog prince, for example. And in fact, the brain cannot always tell the difference between dream simulations and wake experiences. Have you ever had the experience of dreaming about something and then thinking that it has really happened? These are called false memories created by dreams. So a dream can be so realistic that when you wake up, you have a memory trace of something that has happened, and your brain cannot tell the difference between this memory trace and a memory trace that is caused by a real waking event. And for example, people who have narcolepsy, their dreaming is usually intensified because their REM sleep is altered, and they have much more of these false memories. So for example, one patient dreamt of a close relative had died, and he actually called a funeral home to make funeral arrangements, and then run into this relative, close relative. You're not dead? No. So these can actually be quite scary when they happen often. But for our brain, memory traces created by dreams and memory traces created by waking experiences are not necessarily easily distinguishable. If we look at simulations during wakefulness and then during sleep, these images are from a brain in REM sleep compared to wakefulness. Rapid eye movement sleep is a state of sleep where our brain is highly active. It's actually just as active as during wakefulness. It consumes just as much energy as during wakefulness, but the regional activation is slightly different. So the red areas are actually areas that are more active in REM sleep than during wakefulness, and the blue areas are areas that are less active in REM sleep compared to wakefulness. So you can see that the prefrontal area, the F, it's frontal cortex, is less active in REM sleep than in wakefulness. It's not inactive, it's just less active. And so is the parietal cortex and posterior cingulate cortex. While the motor cortex is highly active, even though we don't move in our sleep, our motor cortex is fully activated. It's, we can talk about what it's doing. The temporo-occipital areas are highly active. The amygdala, that is important for emotional experiences. The hippocampal areas that are important for memory and transferring short-term memories to long-term memory are highly active. And now if we think that our most elaborate dreams, our longest and most vivid dreams, tend to take place in REM sleep, even though we dream in other sleep stages as well, if we look at the qualities of dreams and correlate them with this kind of a brain activity pattern of brain in REM sleep. For example, that the prefrontal cortex and the posterior areas are less active during REM sleep might relate to the fact that, in fact, we don't realize that we are asleep. We have this delusional belief that we are awake and this is really happening, because the reality testing machinery, it resides in the prefrontal areas and it's less active during REM sleep. Bizarreness and this uncritical acceptance of dream contents, so our reality testing machinery is not fully functional. We also have amnesia at awakening, and that might be because even though the hippocampal areas are active, so memories are being processed, we need the frontal areas of the brain to transfer short-term memories to long-term memory. But long-term memory traces might be very difficult to form if the prefrontal areas are inactive or less active. I said that this motor cortex is highly active, even though during REM sleep we are actually paralyzed. Our skeletal muscles are fully paralyzed. We cannot move in REM sleep. Our eyes move and our breathing muscles work, but otherwise we are like cooked spaghetti. But the motor cortex is highly active, and if we look at how much movement there is in our dreams, it's actually quite a lot. So the motor cortex is building motor simulations. Just these motor simulations, they don't reach the muscles because we have a mechanism in the brainstem that cuts the commands from the motor cortex to the muscles and causes this paralysis during REM sleep. It's a nice thing because otherwise we might be quite behaviorally compromised during REM sleep. The amygdala is highly active and the hippocampal areas, and if we look at emotions in our dreams, we have plenty of emotions in our dreams, and especially negative emotions that are kind of linked to the amygdala activation. And in fact, our dreams are made of our memories. So the memory areas, the activity of the memory areas might be linked to this. Temporal occipital areas, where our visual and auditory cortices are situated, are highly active. And of course, our dreams are mostly made of visual and auditory components. So the brain activity pattern in REM sleep kind of nicely correspond with the typical qualities of dreams. But this is the brain in REM sleep. Nobody actually asked the subjects who were being scanned in the brain scanner whether they were dreaming or not. So these are not the neural correlates of dreams, these are neural correlates of REM sleep. We dream in all sleep stages, when we fall asleep, in light sleep, in deep non-REM sleep, although most vividly in REM sleep. But these might be, or these were suggested to be also the neural correlates for dream experiences, and I'll get back to this later on. If we look at simulations in REM sleep and non-REM sleep, and assume that the brain is a simulation generator, we should assume that in fact the simulations that we have are similar in all sleep stages. And this seems to be the case, except that in non-REM sleep, and especially very deep non-REM sleep, when our brain is in a resting state, it consumes 30% less energy than during wakefulness, we have a lesser amount of these simulations. So if we wake people up from deep non-REM sleep, they don't always report dreaming. Their dreams are brief and static and not vivid and elaborate narratives. But the longer you sleep, the longer the dream reports get, more elaborate the dreams get throughout the night, both in REM sleep and non-REM sleep. So we have simulations all the time, but just in the early hours of the night, they are more simple, and towards the morning they get more and more elaborate, because in fact the brain is more active towards the morning. So there is actually no, if we look at what kinds of simulations, what kind of dream contents we have in early night versus late night, or non-REM sleep or REM sleep, qualitatively there are very few differences, or in fact no differences at all. It's just that the dreams are shorter and less elaborate in the early night of sleep. So also qualitatively the simulations are similar. We just have less simulations in REM sleep, non-REM sleep, and more in REM sleep typically, but qualitatively the same kinds of simulations. Again, suggesting that it's exactly the same simulation generator that is functional. Sometimes our dream simulations actually intrude wakefulness, not only as false memories, but while we are asleep. And in non-REM sleep disorders, these kind of arousal disorders like sleep talking and sleep walking, sleep eating, having sleep sex. Previously, it was believed that people who have these arousal disorders, they are like zombies. They behave, but nothing goes on in their brain. Because people typically don't remember in the morning what they have been doing during the night. And especially children usually have no recollection of what has been going on. But when this has been studied more carefully, and by waking people up just after a sleepwalking episode, for example, they actually have had an idea, an image, or a dream that seems to have been guiding their actions. Like, for example, one woman who sleepwalked, grabbed her dog, and took the dog, actually rushed the dog to shower. So, completely irrational behavior. Except she reported having a dream that her dog was on fire. So, completely rational behavior once we understand what was going on in her head. In night terrors, night terrors are episodes where the person is actually maybe sitting up in bed and just screaming, eyes wide, having no connection with the real environment. It's very difficult to soothe the person, and the episode just passes. These people really cannot be interviewed, so we don't know what is, because they are apparently extremely frightened. And in the morning, they don't remember what happened during the episode. But it might be feasible to expect that they are having a frightening experience, which is why they are acting out, even though we cannot interview them about the experience later. I said that there is typically this muscle paralysis during REM sleep that we cannot move. There is a rare disorder called REM sleep behavior disorder, which is kind of like opposed to non-REM sleep arousal disorders, because in non-REM sleep arousal disorders, people have their eyes open, they can navigate in the environment, they can interact with other individuals, they can even have a conversation, or they know how to open doors and windows and take a dog to the shower. But in REM sleep behavior disorder, what happens is that the brain is fully in REM sleep, the person's eyes are closed, but the muscle atonia system is not functioning properly, and they actually start acting out their dreams. And usually what they act out is their most vivid and violent dreams. So they can hit, kick, scream, get out of the bed, but they have no connection with the physical environment. Their mind is in the dream world and their body is in the physical world, and they actually often end up injuring themselves or their bed partners because they have these violent behaviors during REM sleep. Luckily, this is an extremely rare form of disorder. But it seems that the content of consciousness, the experience, guides behavior, not only during wakefulness, but also during sleep. So when the simulation generation builds an experience, whether it's based on perceptual input, whether it's internally generated, our behavior is usually kind of guided by this content of the simulation. We can also dream while we are awake. We talk about daydreaming, so of course we are fully awake and we can snap out of this condition. But when there are no external task demands, like when you are sitting on the bus or sitting on the train or listening to a very boring talk, your mind easily starts to wander. So, I'm hungry. I wonder, if I go shopping, what should I buy? What will I cook for dinner? Oh yeah, tomorrow I have this big talk. I wonder how it's going to go, and, become oblivious to the perceptual environment. The processing of sensory information from the environment decreases, and your mind starts to create scenarios about what is going to happen to you. So you engage in this kind of a mental time travel in mind wandering and daydreaming. What has happened to you in the past, and especially what is going to happen to you in the future. So the simulation generator, when you don't need to pay attention to what is going on in the environment, kicks in and kind of overrides your waking perceptual world. So sensory input during wakefulness can actually, when you are not engaged in a task, create a very nice mind-wandering or daydreaming experience about something that's related to the sensory stimuli, but only very, very loosely. Like seeing a frog from the window of a car, you start thinking about an upcoming biology exam or something like that. So mind-wandering is maybe a simulation that is similar to dreaming, only that it takes place during wakefulness when the brain is awake. And if we look at the content of mind wandering, we actually tend to simulate future events more often than think about the past. So, for example, stress about important exams or big talks, or even thinking about how to navigate from here to the railway station, whatever is relevant to you at the moment. So, mind wandering seems to be based on past experiences, but very often future-oriented. So in our daydreaming and mind-wandering, we prepare for future events. So the take-home message might be that the brain is a simulation generator, and these simulations occur in different states of consciousness. And they are slightly different in form because the underlying physiological brain state is different. We've actually now studied people who are undergoing experimental anesthesia. We've woken these people up during the anesthetic infusion. Of course, all of them could not be woken up. And when we ask them, what is going on in your mind, they actually surprisingly often report simple dreamlike imagery. So even during sedation, our simulation machinery seems to be active and building simulations, like dreamlike simulations. What might be the neural network for these simulations? The default mode network is kind of a network of different brain areas which get activated when we are not engaged in any task. So, for example, when we are mind wandering. It involves the prefrontal cortex, dorsolateral and ventromedial prefrontal cortex, the insula, part of the temporal cortex, posterior cingulate cortex, hippocampal areas. You don't need to remember those. So it's not a single coherent system, it's made of these subunits that are functionally integrated, so they talk to each other. And this default mode network is activated, especially when we engage in self-referential thinking, like who am I, what kind of a person I am, what kind of things I like. Autobiographical memory, so what happened to me yesterday, what happened to me in my childhood. Future-oriented simulations, so during mind wandering, this network is active. And different units are slightly differentially active in different types of tasks. So if I try to remember my past, different units talk to each other than if I try to simulate the future. And this default mode network, we can image it with functional magnetic resonance imaging. So we just put people in a scanner and we don't give them any talks, they just lie in the scanner. And this is how the activity looks like during resting wakefulness. And if we put the people in the scanner and image them during light sleep, during this deep, slow wave sleep, and REM sleep, it's surprising how similar the brain activation patterns look like. Even though in one case you are awake, in one case you are in deep sleep, and in one case you are in REM sleep. So it seems that whenever we don't need to pay attention to what is going on in the external environment, this default mode network gets engaged. And it might actually be the network that underlies dream simulations and mind wandering and simulations that we have during anesthetic-induced unresponsiveness. So even though the subsystems communicate with each other slightly differently, the core network is activated in all these states of consciousness. And it has been suggested to be the dreaming network, but this has not been studied directly in conjunction with dreaming. So even though people have slept in the scanner, nobody again asked them whether they had a dream during the scan or not. And it's actually surprisingly difficult to get people to sleep in an fMRI scanner because it's so noisy. Yes? Oh, I didn't explain the colors. I basically easily try to illustrate that the same areas show same types of colors in all these different states of consciousness. So you don't need to be a brain scientist to see that the images are highly similar in different states of consciousness. I didn't go into details. The red areas are more active and the blue areas are less active. In the movie, the sleep scientist, was looking at the EEG trace. Actually, he was looking at the channel information, not even the actual EEG. And he could tell when the girl was dreaming, when Nancy was dreaming. And there have been now a few studies of looking at the neural correlates of dreaming with EEG equipment, so measuring the electrical brain activity from the surface layer of the brain. And this paper that came out in 2017 by Francesca Ciclari, they noticed that both in REM sleep and in non-REM sleep, when you woke people up and they either reported a dream or didn't remember a dream, the high frequency activity in the temporoparietal regions was increased when they recalled a dream. And there was a decrease in low frequency activity when people recalled a dream. And this happened both in non-REM sleep and REM sleep. So especially in the posterior areas of the brain, when people reported the dream, they had more activity than when they didn't report a dream. But this is a correlation. These kind of correlational studies have been conducted before. And correlation really doesn't say anything about causality. Can we predict, based on brain activation patterns, that if we wake the person up, will the person report a dream? And they actually did that by creating an online algorithm that predicted with 87% accuracy whether the person would report a dream or not after an awakening. So when the brain activation patterns looked like this, with 87% probability, they were reporting a dream. And I think that this is a much kind of a nicer, how to say, scientifically speaking, much more strong evidence that we might actually know a little bit about what is going on in the brain when a person dreams. It's still not 100% probability to tell whether a person is dreaming or not. But we are getting maybe closer. And they also looked at this high frequency power in REM sleep dreams. And they noticed that when people dreamt of seeing faces, they had activity in this fusiform face area. It's an area of the brain that activates when I'm looking at the face. If I look at the house, it's not activated. And in dreams where people had perceived faces, this area was active. When people heard speech in their dreams, Wernicke's area, which is active when we perceive speech, was more active than in dreams when there was no speech. And movement in a dream was linked to activity in the superior temporal sulcus. So we might gradually be getting closer and closer to identifying the neural network for dream simulations. We are not there yet, but we might be getting closer. So this is, for a neuroscientist, this is a very exciting time. What I'd like you to remember is that independent of state of consciousness, the same network, the default mode network, is involved in producing these simulations. But as soon as we need to pay attention to what is going on in the environment, another network is engaged, the executive network that helps us to focus on a task. And this default mode network kind of decreases its activity. I see that I'm taking more time. Yeah, and we got started like 10 minutes late, so I can think that I finished in 10 minutes. Okay. So, we have dreams, we have mind wandering. Are these simulations good for anything? In the mind wandering literature, it has been suggested that what mind wandering actually is good for, it's good for predicting what will happen in the future and play out different scenarios of how things might happen. So you get prepared. Okay, if this happens, then I'll do this. If this happens, then I'll do that. I have an important talk. What if I miss the train? What if the train is late? Okay, I'll take an earlier train. I'll make sure I have the taxi number so I can get to the place of the talk quickly, and so on. So you prepare for the future. What about the simulations that we have during the night? Are dream simulations good for anything? So today, this idea of dreams as a form of simulation is getting accepted by most dream researchers. But this idea that dreams are a simulation of the waking perceptual world really doesn't say anything about whether this is functional or not. The question is, if we look at dreams, does the form of dreams follow the function of dreams? If you ask different dream researchers what do they think about the function of dreams, you get very different answers. So there's a lot of disagreement among dream researchers whether or not dreams serve any function, and if they have a function, what that function might be. So it definitely depends on who you ask whether dream simulations are functional. If you ask Bill Domhoff or philosopher Owen Flanagan, they explicitly state that no, it's just a side effect of waking consciousness. We cannot turn our brains off during sleep. It has to be internally activated. So it creates dreams, just like it builds an image of the waking world. A lot of researchers saying, yes, dreams have a function, but they disagree as to what the function is. Some say that dreams have this psychological function, that they help us maintain our mental health and psychological balance, and if we have a traumatic experience, dreams help us to recover. There's very little evidence for this. Some say that dreams have an evolutionary function. I'll talk about those theories next. And then there are these agnostics, and I would say that I'm currently an agnostic person, and there are a few others. We don't yet have enough empirical evidence to say whether dream simulations are functional or not. A distinction that I want to make here is that what is it that we mean when we talk about function? Because, for example, in psychology, the idea that dreams are psychologically functional is very popular, suggesting that dreams maintain mental health, that dreams somehow affect our behavior or our belief models in such a way that it's good for our mental well-being. But in biology, function has a completely different connotation. So for something to be biologically functional, it has to be a feature that natural selection has operated on. And natural selection only cares about features that basically enhance the chances for survival and reproduction. So if we think of dreams as functional, I'd rather talk about the biological function than any psychological function, because my belief is that if any cognitive system has a function, it has to be a biological function, something that natural selection has been operating on from generation to generation to generation. So I'll not talk about these psychological dream theories. The question is it conceivable that dream simulations have done something to enhance the survival or reproduction of our ancestors? Is it even plausible to ask that kind of a question? So can having a dream simulation somehow alter the brain and alter our future behavior in a way that increases probability of survival? This is a very difficult question to answer, but if we look at mental training or simulation training during wakefulness, and we look at what happens in the brain as a consequence of this type of a training, there is clear evidence that if you practice something only in your mind, it alters your brain and it enhances the performance. So for example, people were asked to learned to play a tune on piano. So some practiced actually with the piano. Others, in their minds, the fingering without moving their hands. And after brain scanning, both groups showed changes in the brain and improvement in the task. Those had actually practiced with the piano were better at it, but also those who practiced in their minds got better at playing the tune. And these changes in the brain were related to foot tapping tasks, a very simple motor task. They had to learn a sequence of how to tap. I can't remember what the sequence was. And some people were actually doing the task while other people were imagining, and they had highly similar types of changes in their brain. This, here it's imagination, and here it's actually when you execute the task. So mental training alters the brain, and it enhances performance, at least during wakefulness. And the question is, if it does this during wakefulness, why would it do it during dreams? We don't have to remember our dreams, recall our dreams, interpret our dreams to get practiced. We just need to have the dream, and we get better at whatever the dream is making us practice. But what then is the thing that dreams make us practice? If we get better at what we practice for, we need to dream about things that have had relevance for survival and reproduction, so that natural selection has been able to operate on dreaming. So the most frequent dream contents are most likely the dream contents that reflect this specific function of dreaming, if dreaming has a function. And one suggestion for the function of dreaming is the threat simulation theory, that what our dreams do to us is that they, on a nightly basis, make us practice different types of scenarios to cope with different types of threatening events. Threats that we have faced in our lives, threats that we have heard other people face in their lives. And when we do this repeatedly, every night, night by night, week by week, year by year, we get better at threat perception and threat avoidance behaviors. So like the airline pilots have to practice in a simulator. We practice in our dreams and we get better. And this threat simulation function was selected for because it helped dealing with ancestral selection pressures. So those people who simulated a lot in their dreams about how to cope with different types of threats in the environment, they were slightly faster in recognizing threats. They were slightly faster in reacting to threats. So they were slightly more likely to survive and leave offspring than individuals who did not simulate, who had happy dreams, made them mentally healthy. And we reap this benefit from these nocturnal simulations without recalling our dreams, because we know most dreams are not remembered. We don't need to report our dreams or interpret our dreams to get this benefit from the practice. So this is one suggestion for the biological function of dreaming. It basically works so that when during wakefulness you get exposed to a real threatening event, whether it's somebody chasing you or you're missing the bus or failing an important exam, it leaves a memory trace to your long-term memory. And then during sleep, there is a dream production mechanism that selects those memory traces that have highest emotional saliency from long-term memory banks and creates a dream based on these highly salient memories. And usually they happen to be negative threat memories. Sometimes they might be highly positive memories also. But if any one of you has gotten married, like one of the best things that can ever happen to you, how many of you dreamed before the wedding of everything going smoothly? Probably you dreamt about showing up on the altar in a dirty dress or marrying a wrong man or something else going horribly wrong. So it seems that our dream production system is very good at building these kinds of threat simulation dreams instead of happy dreams. And when we practice night after night, this has an effect on future behavior. The threat recognition and avoidance skills improve. Or this is how it might have worked in our ancestors. Now, today's environment is highly different from the environment of our ancestors. So the way it works today is you see a scary movie, it leaves a very salient memory trace, and then during the night, Freddy comes and visits you. This is a drawing by a 6-year-old boy who had horrible nightmares after he had seen the movie. So maybe this kind of a simulation machine in creating threat simulations really doesn't help us survive or reproduce in the current environment. But it might have been useful for our ancestors, which is the reason why we still have this threat simulation mechanism. So it builds threat dreams, even if they are not useful anymore. I'll skip that slide. The other idea is that dreaming could help us also with something else than preparing for threatening events. That dreams could be a form of social simulation. And in primate evolution, a lot of the selection pressures have not come from the physical environment, they've come from the social environment. So primate brain and primate cognition has been highly shaped by the social environment. Those who are most adept in their social environment have more friends, more allies, stronger support networks, are maybe in the ancestral environment were more likely to survive than those who had very bad social skills. And this idea that dreams could be a social simulation platform, it's actually a relatively old idea. It arose as a response to the threat simulation theory when it was first proposed. And there were lots of ideas that dreams could simulate social skills, bonding, attachment, different types of social interactions, close networks. But nobody really formulated the theory in a manner that you could do empirically testable predictions out of it. So we tried to do that. And we are currently testing the social simulation theory. We've tested the threat simulation theory a lot. I did my PhD on that. And now we are working with the social simulation theory. Because if we get better at what we practice for, we should then practice social situations in our dreams. We should practice especially positive social interactions, because if we practice negative social interactions, we don't make friends and allies. And the questions that we are asking is that, is there a bias towards simulating social events in our dreams? We know that majority of dreams actually portray other dream characters, other individuals, and there's a lot of interaction between the dream self and other characters. But is there a bias towards positive social interactions? And here we have conflicting findings. In some studies, aggressive interactions are much more common than friendly interactions. And in some studies, there's a balanced ratio. In some studies, neutral interactions are the most common type of interaction. But especially if we think that what would be important to train for is creating these close relationships with a small number of individuals and maintaining this relationship with people who are most important to us. Our interactions in dreams with close ones versus strangers don't seem to be any different. So we don't practice especially positive interactions with close individuals in our dreams. So there's still a lot to do with the social simulation theory, but it might be that while the threat simulation theory explains one chunk of dream content, which is a big chunk, and that is different types of threats and how we react to those, and the social simulation theory explains another big chunk of dream content, the positive social aspects of dreams, that in fact these theories are not mutually exclusive, and together they might, if we manage to combine these theories, they might actually explain majority of dream content and the biases in our dreams. But that's for the future to show. So the conclusion. Thank you for your patience. So the function of dreaming necessarily relates to the function of waking consciousness, because we don't simulate only during sleep, we simulate in other states of consciousness as well. And simulations which occur when the environmental demands are high, these simulations are guided by senses, and they make sure that we appropriately react to the environment. And when we don't need to be engaged in a task, awake or asleep or under anesthesia, this simulation generation machinery still keeps working, and it produces simulations that are task independent. Mind wandering, dreaming, daydreaming are basically a form of internally activated simulation based on past experiences and expectations, with the aim to prepare the individual for what is going to happen in the future. Because future is easily predicted by how things have gone in the past. Do dreams have a function? I don't know. There is absolutely no agreement whether there is a function at all. If there is a function, I believe it has to be a biological function. It's something that natural selection has been operating on. And it has to be related to the function of waking consciousness. We can't have two simulation mechanisms doing completely different things. So that would be very weird for natural selection to operate on something like that. And now the real reason why the movie clip was personally important to me, to get this to work, I want you to close your eyes and do not open them until I tell you to. Because this is a very short movie, it's only a few seconds. And I want to get it running before you can open your eyes. So when the girl was taken to the sleep clinic, I cut out the scene that preceded that sleep study. Now you can open your eyes. Look at the name of the sleep clinic. So that's the real punchline of my talk. You probably all heard of cognitive dreams. But it seems that 10 years before I was born, Wes Craven created a movie that turned out to be too cognitive for my career. And the funniest thing is, I've seen that movie when I was a kid, and then again, maybe when I was 25 years old, and I had already started to study dreams. And it was only as an adult that I saw that particular part of the movie. And I think that's absolutely hilarious. So, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Katja. This was really interesting and also entertaining, and I'm sure that there will be many questions. And let's see who will be the first one to start. Okay.
My question is, when you are speaking about those kind of new experience that we are experiencing in the dream, for example, threat or something like that. So we are usually also experiencing a physical part of it. But in that sense, if, I don't know, someone wants to kill me and I'm experiencing something which I normally do not experience, so is it like physically really something new for me, or is it something based on what I already have?
I think the question boils down to, can dreams give us an experience that is completely novel? Okay, I think that if you can imagine it during wakefulness, your dreams can easily also create it without any kind of guided process. So anything that you can imagine can happen in your dreams. Also an experience that you have not actually experienced before, but you might get an idea of how it might feel. Because when we are asleep, the associative networks, they work much more loosely than during wakefulness, when our kind of straightforward logical thinking, rational creatures, right? But during sleep, these associative networks are activated in a slightly different manner. So I think that dreams can create novel experiences, but probably nothing that you couldn't imagine also during wakefulness if you really tried.
Is the cause for these REM sleep disorders known? For example, if there's some kind of genetic factor or an environmental factor or something like that?
Okay, so REM sleep behavior disorder is more typical in the elderly, and especially people who have specific types of neurological disorders. Parkinson's disease or multiple system atrophy, which are closely related. So it seems that these pathological processes that happen in Parkinson's disease also link to the underlying brain basis for REM sleep behavior disorder. And in fact, it's been noticed that this REM sleep behavior disorder is probably underdiagnosed, and it tends to manifest itself earlier than the signs of the actual neurological disease, like Parkinson's symptoms. But there seem to be also idiopathic forms, in a sense that a person gets REM sleep behavior disorder, and later there is no Parkinsonian disease. But the problem is that we usually cannot follow these people for tens of years, and they might actually die before the Parkinsonian disease would start to manifest. So it's a good question whether there's an idiopathic form of this, or is it always related to neurological illnesses?
When trying to understand the function of dreams, or if there's a function, do you think recurring dreams could be useful to understand in that sense? Something that people dream, it might not be often, but could be years down the line, again, it's something that kind of comes up again.
Yeah, only a small part of dreams are recurring, but in people who, for example, experienced a traumatic event, they tend to have recurring dreams and unfortunately recurring nightmares about this event. So maybe recurring dreams are kind of one example of the threat simulation mechanism in action, in a sense that there is a memory trace that is highly salient, and it gets activated on a regular basis over and over again. And the more often you activate a memory trace, the more recent it is, the more easily it gets activated again. So maybe recurring dreams are just like one form of these. Whether they have any kind of extra specific function, I would say no, but they might be a manifestation of the same system, and the same system picking the same memory traces over and over and over again. And also a physiological state of the body might come into play. For example, people often tell that when they get fever, so when the fever is rising, they always have the same dream. So maybe the physiological state of the body tells the simulation mechanism to pick a particular memory trace and activate it again. So they get the same dream every time they have a rising temperature.
One more question here.
Yeah. In your research, have you come across or discussed the role of dreams and dreaming in, let's say, hypnotic practices and treatments, and in shamanistic practices? Because in both cases you are put into a trance and you go inside your head and you see things.
I have to say that that area is completely out of my expertise. But, I mean, dreams have fascinated mankind for thousands of years. And there are many, many different approaches to dreams. So we have now a neuroscience of dreaming, which was non-existent 30 years ago. But there are a lot of humanistic approaches, a lot of cultural approaches, dream work approaches that I'm not an expert on. But so there are many different ways to kind of approach dreams.
More questions? First.
Hi there. You mentioned, when you were talking about night terrors and those kind of disorders, you mentioned that you woke up, the subjects were woken up after the night terror or the sleepwalking event, but not during. Was that very specific? Why didn't you wake them up during?
Okay, this is actually not my study. This was done in Canada. So when people who regularly sleepwalk slept in a sleep clinic, when you wake the person up in the middle of the episode, they are a part of their brain is in very deep sleep. They are usually highly confused. They don't know where they are, what is happening, what's going on, who the person who's waking them up is, and they can sometimes actually be aggressive, especially if they have had some sort of frightening imagery. So it's easier to wait until they have calmed down and then wake them up and ask them. Of course, if they are doing something that might harm them, for example, they are moving around in a way that they could get injured, then you go in and wake them up. But sleepwalkers, if you see a person sleepwalking, there is this myth that you are not supposed to wake up a sleepwalker. And it actually comes from the ancient Native American belief that when we sleep, the soul leaves the body. And if you wake the body while the soul is not in it, the soul cannot return to it. So if you wake up a sleepwalker, the soul is still wandering somewhere out there. But the real case of why it's not wise to wake up a sleepwalker is that they might be really confused. And it's easier just to tell them, because they can hear often and they can react to environmental stimuli. Go back to bed. You know, go back to bed and not even touch them. Yes?
Is there a particular reason why we do not remember our dreams? Because my husband was reading something about dream diaries, and people were writing that after they have done it a lot of times, they cannot sleep properly after that. And when they are stopping to write dream diary, they can sleep again.
Okay. There are a lot of individual differences in how easy it is to remember your dreams. I mean, some people recall, they wake up in the morning and they remember several dreams, and others say, I think the last dream I remember it was from 10 years ago. What seems to be most correlated with good dream recall is attitude towards dreams and interest to dreams. So people who are interested in dreams have better dream recall. And if you start keeping a dream diary, so every morning the first thing you do when you wake up is you don't move, you think, did I dream? What did I dream about? And then you start writing it down. You get better and better and better in your dream recall. So you start to remember more dreams and more details about the dreams. And the funniest example I have is from a girl who participated in one of my dream diary studies. Students get credits for participating in studies, so she wanted credits, but I'm not a very good subject because I never recall my dreams. I said, okay, here's a dream diary, here's the instructions, come back in 2 weeks for an interview. She came back 2 weeks later, she was completely pissed off. Once she had started to pay attention to her dreams, she recalled 3 to 5 dreams every morning. She spent 2 hours every morning writing down her dreams because she was a good study participant. And after the dream diary period was over, she said that, thank God, I don't remember any dreams at all when I don't have to write them down. So dream recall is actually highly dependent on how much you pay attention to your dreams, and you can practice it.
Hi, is there any connection between dreaming and the quality of sleep? Because I've actually heard very conflicting information. I actually came into this thinking that you only dreamed in REM sleep, but that clearly, after your talk, doesn't seem to be the case.
That again is a good question. As far as I know, there are no good controlled experimental studies on whether high dream recall or dreaming about particular kinds of things links to good sleep. Okay, if you have nightmares, that not necessarily links to poor sleep quality, because nightmares wake you up, you're frightened, you're agitated, it's difficult to get back to sleep. But some people have told me that I dream so much, and they are so vivid and elaborate, and so much happens in my dreams that when I wake up in the morning, I'm exhausted, because I've been working out all night. I've been doing a lot of stuff instead of having a restful sleep. But as far as I know, there are no studies on that topic, and I think it's a very interesting question, especially with people with very good dream recall. Does that compromise their sleep quality? So even if the dreams are positive, they can be so engaging that you get mentally exhausted for having them.
Yes.
Hi. Do we dream every night?
Again, that's a good question, because in order to know whether a person is dreaming or not, we cannot yet rely on brain-based data, because that's not 100% accurate in predicting whether a person is dreaming or not. We have to ask the person. So we have to interrupt the dreaming process. We have to wake them up to ask whether you dreamt or not. And there, in most studies, people report dreams every night from different sleep stages to varying degrees. But then there seems to be an extremely small percentage of population who said that they cannot remember their dreams. They didn't dream even when they were children. And if they sleep in the lab and they are woken up from REM sleep, they still cannot remember their dreams. And that's about 0.3% of population. And now the question is, do they dream? Or is it that they just don't remember their dreams? And so far we don't know what the answer is, because we need to have a 100% prediction accuracy of brain correlates of dreaming to be able to tell whether these people dream or not. But there's been a study on patients with REM sleep behavior disorder who tend to act out their dreams. And some patients, when they are woken up from REM sleep, when they have been acting, they don't remember anything. So they have no dream recall whatsoever. But they act in highly similar fashion, similar types of movements, like hitting, kicking, screaming, smoking a cigarette in their sleep. So these researchers who did this study, they believe that this is a sign that these people were dreaming even though they cannot remember it, that the content of consciousness was guiding their behavior even if there was no recall afterwards.
Didn't you say you had a heuristic, a way of figuring out that was 87% certain whether somebody was actually dreaming? Surely if you apply that over enough time to somebody, you'd be able to figure out whether within 10%, 13%,
yes,
you'd know.
Okay. It was the Ciclari study, and I think it's highly promising, but it's one study. It's a small number of subjects. It needs a lot of replication, and we have actually been trying to replicate it, just not the prediction part, but the neural correlates part, the high-frequency activity in the posterior. We can't get the same result. So, you know, there is progress, but it's, and I believe that one day we are able to brain read, which is actually quite scary, because if we can brain read your dreams, we can brain read maybe other stuff as well, but not yet. Yeah, yeah, not with 100% accuracy.
Yes.
Hi. With dream recall, do you know if there's any data or linkage between people who have aphantasia, so the lack of lacking the ability to visualize?
If I recall correctly, there has been a study looking at whether these people dream, and they do have experiences during sleep, but they are not typically visual. So just as people who are congenitally blind, so who have never had the experience of seeing things, they do dream, but in their dreams they simulate the environment. It's in the same way that they perceive the environment while they're awake. So it's a space without visual qualities. So people who cannot visualize, maybe they cannot produce visual images in their dreams either. But I would need to check that up. So.
Yes, there is a question hidden there. Yeah.
Like a few questions crossed through my mind. One of them, like, how much control do we have? Okay, not on the dream itself. You were talking about the lucid dream. That's another question, like being able to control your dream. But how much control do we have, like whether you dream or not? Can I choose? Like, I wish I didn't dream too much this night.
I really don't know. And that might relate to your question of hypnotic suggestions. it is possible to do self-suggestions before going to bed, that tonight I will dream and I will dream about this particular thing. And for some people it works, you know, I want to dream about a tiger. And they actually end up dreaming about a tiger. But is it possible to have a suggestion that tonight I will not dream, I will not dream? I don't know if it works. So you do a case study and let me know. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, hey. You mentioned the lucid dreaming. Well, I've heard some people that it happened to me only once and just by pure randomness, but I've heard some people say that there are techniques that you can actually train to be able to like control your dreams.
Yeah, there are actually many different types of techniques to increase lucid dreaming. Because lucidity is a funny thing. Usually when you realize in a dream that you are dreaming, you get so excited that you wake up. So continuing the dream or controlling the dream is actually quite difficult for many people. One kind of technique is that lucid dreams most often occur in REM sleep and towards the morning, because that's when we have most REM sleep, is to wake up about an hour or two before your regular wake-up time, stay awake for 30 to 60 minutes, even have a cup of coffee, go back to bed, with the hope that you will actually go into REM stage immediately. And in this falling asleep process, keep in mind that you want to dream. And you can even think about what was the last thing that you dreamt about and hope that you can kind of return to dream. This is the wake back to bed technique. Another thing is that the prefrontal area is normally less active during REM sleep than during wakefulness, but apparently, because lucid dreaming requires these self-reflective abilities, the prefrontal area activity is increased in lucid dreams compared to non-lucid dreams. So to activate your reality testing machinery, you can practice during wakefulness. For example, every now and then stop. Is this real or am I dreaming? So throughout the day, you stop and do a reality test. And then you hope that this generalizes also into dreams. And especially in the dream, you can have these dream signs that if I see this thing in my dream, this is so peculiar or this is so weird that it can remind me to do the reality test. So if I see a worm reading a book, I ask, well, whether this is real or if this is a dream. And it can help me realize in the dream that this is a dream. And then learning to control your dreams. The biggest thing is learning to stay in the lucid dream and not get so excited as to wake up. And some people have lucidity without control, and some people manage to meet whoever they want, Brad Pitt or George Clooney or Angelina Jolie, or do whatever you want in your lucid dreams. I once tried walking through the wall, and that was weird. My brain just couldn't comprehend how it would feel like to walk through the wall, so that was extremely difficult because my brain just couldn't wrap itself around that you can do this. I practiced it quite a lot, and when I stopped practicing, I stopped having lucid dreams.
But one question related to that, for example, I don't know if this is part of lucid dreaming, but if you have a nightmare and you realize you're dreaming, sometimes you may want to accelerate the end of the dreaming, of the nightmare. So you don't want to stay in the nightmare, but you want to accelerate it. And you can, for example, if there is someone chasing you, you stop and you wait that it comes. I mean, is this also, so it is a different type of process, but it is also, can also this be considered a lucid dreaming, or is it just, I mean, you are aware that, and you just want to finish it quickly?
Yeah, if you are aware that it's a dream, then it's a lucid dream. And in fact, some kids learn to have lucid nightmares. So they learn that this is a nightmare and they can wake themselves up. They usually don't try to control the dream, they end the dream and wake up. And it has been suggested that practicing lucid dreaming could be kind of one therapy method for people who have a lot of nightmares. But it's not easy for everyone to learn to lucid dream. And it's a capacity that might require a lot of training.
But are there any cases of people that do this lucid dreaming like very often, that you kind of stopped confusing what is reality and what is a dream?
I know that there are people who are, how would I say, lucid dream enthusiasts. I mean, there are these discussion forums, there are newsletters for lucid dreamers. I don't know if they have more of these false memories than regular people. I don't know that anyone has studied them. But in fact, frequent lucid dreamers are, for a neuroscientist, they are an interesting group of subjects, because if you could get them to sleep in the scanner and have a lucid dream, they'd actually help us to figure out the neural correlates of dreaming. But even frequent lucid dreamers usually have trouble falling asleep in the scanner and especially achieving lucidity. But there are now a couple of studies on how the brain looks like in lucid dream. And the prefrontal area is more active than in non-lucid dream.
Yes.
I wanted to know what are the biggest challenges in this kind of studies, like, I don't know, gathering enough statistics or finding some bias, or I don't know, from this point of view, so what's the techniques and main challenges somehow? I know it's a bit vague question, but...
Yeah, but I think that the biggest challenge is that whenever you want to study an experience or people's experiences, you need to rely on their own reports. So the first question, of course, is, are the subjects reliable? So are they confabulating? Do they want to just, kind of write down reports that are not dreams at all? But usually people remain quite truthful. You might need to train your subjects in reporting, because for some people it's not easy to describe a dream or any experience in that sense. But the problem in studying experiences is that the data that you have, it's not the experience itself, it's the report of the experience, and they are never one-to-one match. Because there are a lot of things that are very difficult to describe verbally or even in drawings. With dreams, the problem is the recall, that a lot of stuff we just, it disappears. You wake up and you remember a fragment of the dream, but not what happened before it. If you wake people up in the sleep lab, so you can wake them up multiple times and you can check what sleep stage they are in, and that they had all been in the same sleep stage for the same number of minutes. When you bring people to a new environment, they start to dream about the lab. So you get dreams about people in white coats and electrodes hanging from their heads. And okay, this is not ecologically valid setting to collect dreams. So there are a lot of these kind of practical issues in where to collect dreams, from whom to collect dreams, how to train your participants, how to analyze them, and how to get samples that are, have statistical power. And for example, in patient studies, that's almost impossible. I did one study on patients who had this REM sleep behavior disorder, and I spent 6 months in the lab with the participants, waking them up from REM sleep and interviewing them, and I think I finally managed to get 10 subjects who all slept 2 or 3 nights in the lab and maybe less than 100 dreams, which is statistically speaking a lousy sample. But from healthy young university students, if they just keep systematic dream diaries and you train them and they are, motivated, you can get hundreds and hundreds of dreams. And that can already give you some sort of an idea of what kinds of things in dreams systematically pop up, independent of the individual.
Maybe I do have one question. Okay, no, you first.
I have a not nice question, but if you are agnostic about whether dreams have a function or not, what's the point of studying dreams?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Okay. My approach would be starting from the neuroscience perspective. So when people have an experience, when you have a conscious experience, we really do not know what are the minimal requirements from the brain to create an experience. So what brain areas have to be activated in what type of manner for you to have an experience opposed to not have an experience. And this is impossible to study during wakefulness, because when you are awake, you have experiences all the time. Your brain is never unconscious, so to say. Sleep might give us the benefit of being able to compare dreamless sleep to dream sleep, which might help us to uncover the kind of the minimal correlates for a conscious experience. Of course, the problem is the recall. So is the person dreaming, or don't they just remember them? And that is one reason why we've also studied experiences during anesthesia, because the whole aim in general anesthesia is to render the person unconscious. Patients often report dreams after anesthesia, but we don't really know if these dreams come from the anesthesia itself, or whether from the very long recovery period when the anesthetic drug is dissipating from the system and the anesthetic sleep turns into normal sleep. So that's why we have been waking people up from experimental anesthesia and interviewing them, and it seems that their simulation mechanism isn't silent. Sometimes they remember an experience, sometimes they don't. So both sleep and general anesthesia could help us to figure out the neural correlates of consciousness. And from a philosophical point of view, cognitive neuroscience point of view, also clinical perspective, that would be an achievement. Because we have a lot of patients who are diagnosed as in coma or vegetative state, and it seems that some of these individuals are wrongly diagnosed, that they actually do have experiences, that some of them are connected to the environment, and we treat them as if though they are vegetables. So for these kinds of purposes, finding the neural correlates of consciousness would be kind of, Nobel Prize stuff. So maybe that's motivation enough. I want to win a Nobel Prize.
Okay, maybe then I have one question. You were talking about the biological function of dreams. Are there differences between different dreams, or do you think that all dreams, including nightmares or any even type of disorder, have biological function or not?
I mean, if there is a biological function to dreams, that doesn't need to show up in every single dream that we have, because we can simulate a lot of stuff, but it should show systematically up.
In terms of categories of dreams, there could be, I guess that there are different categories of dreams, right? Or not? Or is it blurred?
Well, there are different types of contents of dreams.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually skipped one slide where we looked at threats in dreams.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, 3/4 of our dreams typically have threatening events in them. They are not all life-threatening, being chased, being killed kind of dreams. They can be minor, like, failing to do something or missing the last bus of the evening. But if there is a function, this function should show up in majority of dreams, in a majority of people's dreams. But it doesn't mean that it needs to show up in every single dream.
Mm-hmm.
So if there is a function, this form should follow it quite systematically.
Yes?
Yeah, that's really interesting that you brought that up, because I mean, looking back at the handful of dreams I've had which have been like, above average experientially, they've been good ones. They've had this kind of magic where I've had like, semi-superpowers, and usually I tend to think kind of traumatic events in real life are more, how should I say, like maybe educative. Then you learn more from them than the good times, perhaps, because you have to kind of take a moment and figure things out, take a step back or whatever, get some perspective. But yeah, in dreams, the ones I remember or do recall from since way back when, they tend to have had this influence on me and stuck with me, and kind of like the thing with the Katja Institute, they've had like a profound effect on me and guided me onwards. Kind of, that was just a thought I had. But in terms of a question, I mean, I don't know how to really rephrase this, but it's super interesting to this cognitive aspect of everything, right? And how emotionality tends to be a driving factor of our humanity. And I wonder if that couldn't be part of the reason for, having dreams still at this day and age. Sure, I mean, they'd take a good long eon on for them to, not exist anymore. But just saying, perhaps the more pertinent question is, why do, if the same kind of areas of the brain light up in the MRI scans, then, there's, for instance, learning skills. Some of us are, like you said, more audiovisual or spatially inclined, or learn with their hands moreover than perhaps from reading books or whatever. But so I'm sure you can't tell those kinds of differences in an MRI scan, though, can you?
No.
No, naturally not. And so, that would do a lot of the explaining for why we have so different experiences in our dreams. But yeah, I don't know,
For skill training, the more immersive the simulation, the more you are part of it, the more efficient it is. So even during waking simulations, when to become doctors trained for saving patients, the more realistic the simulation, the more immersive it is. Usually, the better the learning outcome. You had actually so many questions that I probably kind of skipped half. But this link between emotion and cognition, I think that is important, because we think that we are rational cognitive creatures. We are actually, very much kind of influenced by our emotions. We are actually emotional decision makers. And you cannot really tear cognition and emotion apart. And I think that's really nicely shows up in dreams. That it might be that some basic emotions and emotional qualities of our memory traces guide dream formation. That some things end up more easily in dreams than others. And also, when you talked about recalling some of your kind of important dreams, some people call these big dreams, dreams that you remember for years and decades. You said that they have been positive more often than negative. And I think that is a good example of what we tend to remember from our past. It's the best and it's the worst. And everything else in between, the mundane, gets forgotten. And that's also the case with dreams. So if we would only study these people's big dreams or worst nightmares, we would get a highly biased view of what dreams on average are like. And for that we need systematic dream diaries and wake people up in the lab and ask them, every night, several times a night, what did they dream about?
But is there any basis for saying, though, that how should I say it, that you kind of, are there areas of the brain that go dormant during dreaming? Can we allocate more processing power to for instance, for me, visually speaking, I've always been, there's this autistic kid who can draw cities based on memory, right?
Yep.
I'm sure a lot of you have seen him. And I've always been jealous of skills like that, or whatever, people who draw better than me, basically. And but still, the things I'm able to concoct in visually, and experientially in my dreams are just flabbergasting. I'm not sure how what's going on there. Is it due to the kind of separation between waking and dreaming? Is there something that a lot of the system that turns on off and allocates power towards that, or?
Well, we know that the brain is differentially activated in sleep and in different sleep stages, but are there areas that go absolutely dormant that would not be, active at all? Maybe not. And whether you could, train some areas of the brain. I think that when it comes to lucid dreaming and the prefrontal areas, this is something that you can actually train, so that your prefrontal areas are more active during sleep than normally, so that you can realize that you are dreaming. That maybe we could train our parts of our brain to get differentially activated, but I think training the brain is not easy if you try to do it on purpose. I want my audio visual associative areas more active during sleep so I can have visually more elaborate, vivid dreams. Yeah. Okay.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I wanted to ask, well, there's stories of people having like very good ideas in dreams, like maybe inventing something or solving some mathematical problem. Do you think that it makes sense that it's possible that our brains are able to maybe solve other problems other than like social problems, or maybe more like life-threatening problems maybe like mathematical problems in a more creative way than during awake reasoning?
Yeah, I think this is an excellent question. There are many examples, even from history of science. Nobel Prize-winning stuff has been realized in a dream. Like Kekulé realized that benzene has a ring structure when he had this kind of a hypnagogic hallucination falling asleep of a snake eating its own tail in the fireplace. Or Ottolovi figuring out how to test for a theory that transmission between two cells is chemical, so what happens in the synapse. He won a Nobel Prize for it. The question is, what is creativity? And can dreams give us something that our waking brain cannot? So creativity is basically defined as putting together old stuff in a novel way. And I think our brains do this during sleep. But is it something that you could never ever come up during wakefulness? Is it like an extra form of creativity that is not available to you during wakefulness? I don't really know. So I wouldn't trust my brain to come up with an idea how to win the Nobel Prize during sleep. I hope I can do that during wakefulness. I have an anecdote of a psychology professor who one morning woke up with the greatest idea ever that he had in a dream, but he couldn't remember what the idea was. So next night, he had a paper and pen next to his bed. I'm going to have the same dream again. So I'm going to figure out what this great idea was. Okay, so he wakes up in the middle of the night, scribbles something down, goes back to sleep, wakes up in the morning and says, okay, now I figure out what the dream was and what's this great idea. Do you know what the note said? Fucking great idea. So this is actually a Finnish psychology professor testing the creativity function. He had a great idea, but he still couldn't figure out what the idea was. But yeah, I'm not sure if our brains can, perform stuff during sleep that they couldn't perform during wakefulness, unconstrained.
Yeah, of course. I mean, maybe it's not like I want to rely on my brain, like my sleeping brain. It was more like in the line of what you were saying, that maybe there are like the different, lines of understanding dreams, like maybe as should be like social contents or maybe life-threatening contents. But isn't it the fact that some people can have these more logical dreams and still solve logical problems in the sleep show that like this simulation is somewhat more general than these two options? Like it can lead to this other kind of reasoning.
Yeah, and I think it might also depend partially on what you do for a living and what you want from your dreams. I mean, artists get a lot of creative ideas and inspiration from their dreams. Scientists could get ideas. I wouldn't, rely on getting them, but it's a possibility. So definitely dreams could be used for different purposes, but would that be their function? I mean, it has been suggested that the function of dreaming is to give people creative ideas, novel ideas. And when we look hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dreams, there are novel ideas, but only like in 0.0001%. So I wouldn't say that then would be the biological function of dreaming, to give people creative ideas. So it would have to show up much more often if that would be something that would be selected for. Yeah. So people can give creative ideas, but is that the function of dreaming? I would say no. Yeah, so I would say that natural selection, when it has selected for creativity, it's been waking creativity, and that can show up in our dreams. But it's problem solving during wakefulness that has been important.
Okay, maybe one more question, if there is a final question. Well, I do have actually one. I have many, but I will ask you one. So you were talking about, of course, dreams, but also these mind wandering and other states of mind that are during wakefulness. But you could also think in terms of hallucinations, or either drug-induced hallucinations, or also hallucinations that you may have because of different reasons. Are all these things, you know, in a way unified by your idea of them being simulations of reality, or do you still have differences that you think are worth considering when you know, considering the whole scenario of possible, you know, night, let's say, dream-like experiences?
I think it's the same simulation mechanism, but if you put drugs into your brain, the simulations that it's going to produce might be quite, how would I say, bizarre. I would say that the brain on drugs, the simulations that it produces, well, of course, there's nothing that natural selection could have operated on. Is it something that could add to a creativity? Possibly. So basically my answer would be it's the same simulation mechanism, but the simulations that it produces depends on what state your brain is in, if it's asleep or if it's awake or if it's on drugs, and on what kinds of drugs, like dissociative anesthetics or psychedelics.
Because you were also talking about anesthetic, for example, and the dreams induced by this. So, I mean, it is still belonging to the category.
Yeah. We actually had participants who were getting 4 different drugs, and one of the drugs was ketamine, which is a dissociative drug sometimes used for recreational purposes because it creates hallucinations. And their dreams were quite different from the dreams who were getting regular anesthetics that you get for surgery. So definitely the stuff that you put into the brain affects.
But let's say the theory of this being a simulation of reality, you know, would be the same in a way.
Yeah, but I would say that it's a functional simulation on ketamine. In fact, people reported a lot of dreams about cubes here and there and everywhere, and they were walking among cubes and climbing across cubes, and there were people in the cubes, and I don't know what it was about the cubes and ketamine, but a lot of cubes. Possibly.
Okay, so I think that probably we have to end here the talk, but before doing that, 2 things. The first one is that maybe if Katja wants to stay with us for the 15-20 minutes, if usually in the Science Cafe we always have the option at the very end, if you want to ask her question in Finnish or questions that you didn't ask during the question and answer sessions, she will be staying maybe a few more minutes with us.
Yeah, I can stay for a short while.
Yes, for a short while. Then the second is an announcement of the next Science Cafe. That will be a special one. It's on February 9th. These will be more of a science and art event. So we will have a Moon Jazz Jam Science Cafe. With it's like jam as in jazz jam sessions, as in jazz. It is like dialogue between different instruments, and we will have dialogue between our cosmologist, Professor Escovaltoja. Most of you know him. He will talk about the moon, and he will dialogue with a jazz pianist, Fabrizio Mocata. And this will be an event followed by a panel discussion about dialogue between science and art. It will be in the, it's called VPK building, right? In Finnish, how do you say it? VPK, okay, it's close by here, the beautiful hall. I don't know if you have been there. On Saturday, 5 to 7, once again. So a little bit of a different event, but I hope that many of you will be joining us more in the direction of science and art collaboration. You will find more information on Facebook page, and we will advertise it later on. And however, now it's time to thank for this very, very interesting talk and discussion, Dr. Katja Valli. Thank you so much.